Hello, everybody. It is April 25th, 2019. This is the Kubernetes community meeting. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, just a few ground rules. This is a community meeting, and we'll be posting this and streaming this live on YouTube. So please be mindful of what you say is being recorded. If you are not speaking, please mute yourself so that we can make the environment as noise-free as possible. Today, we will be, and please keep in mind that the code of conduct is always in effect, so be excellent to each other. I am still looking for a note taker. If you need the notes, I am going to post them on chat in the sidebar. That would really help us out. We're going to have a demo today from Daniel, who's going to go in a bit, then some release updates from Claire, a contributor tip of the week from me, and then two SIGs are going today. SIG PM, Stephen Augustus, and SIG testing, who I don't know who the person is, but hopefully they'll show up on time. And with that, Daniel, you have 10 minutes. Take it away.
Thanks, and thanks very much for having us. I'm here today with my colleague Diane, who is the Director of Community Development at Red Hat, and I'm Daniel, I'm the Product Manager at Red Hat for something we call the Operator Framework. So operators have been known for quite a while. So I'm quickly glancing over the general concept, and then we're going to see how an operator actually works in action on a little cluster I have here running. So basically, just to level set, an operator is a piece of software that extends Kubernetes to understand a specific application's operational requirements. So basically, how it's installed, how it's scaled, how it fails over, and how it's upgraded. So this is like an evolution from all the aspects of packaging and getting your application initially installed. So this is really targeting day two operations and beyond. What I'd like it to compare to is like a colleague sitting next to you who you can just ask to provision you a cluster or run a backup of that cluster or restore the cluster for you if it's broken down, right? So the knowledge that it is in this human's brain is encoded into software which is embedded into the operator, which runs as an application on Kubernetes, talking to the Kubernetes API to make things happen, to eventually spawn deployments, stateful sets, and so on in the background, but also give you a Kubernetes-friendly interface by the use of custom resource definitions to control how the application is going to be deployed. The advantage of this is that it uses Kubernetes under the hood, right? So you can have very flexible app architectures while not having to reinvent the wheel of things like secret handling, service discovery, and other core concepts. What you really end up using is the same kube control tooling that you have, and it allows your apps to be now much smarter and truly hybrid because an operator runs on Kubernetes cluster, which could run on your notebook as well as in a data center or in a public cloud. So in order to kind of shape how operators come to life on a cluster and how you build operators, there is an open source project called the Operator Framework, which we announced at KubeCon last year. This is a set of tools that help you quickly get started writing an operator and also helps you run multiple operators on your cluster. So it's something for the communities in terms of builders to easily create applications, Kubernetes native applications, as we like to call them, using common methods and provide standard set of tooling. And also for the consumers of these applications on cluster, it keeps apps up to date. This is primarily the responsibility of the operator lifecycle manager. And it also provides a lot of security around the permissions that an operator has, which is usually a quite privileged and long-lived application on the cluster. If you want to try it out, we have several links here on the slides as well as in the notes section. What I really recommend is the Katacoda courses, where you get a browser-based interactive tutorial on running operators, writing operators, and using them in production. And last but not least, we have launched a couple of weeks back a community initiative to gather operators for the Kubernetes community on operatorhub.io. With that, I'm going to switch to the demo. So here I have a local Kubernetes cluster. I'm in a namespace that I've set up previously for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start deploying an operator and use it to install and manage a distributed key value store, which you all are very familiar with. It's etcd. So let's get ahead and start it. To install an operator, you could basically say, okay, you go and deploy it as a normal application. So it's a deployment with a pod that has a certain set of rules attached to it with role bindings, and that's it. That's really what an operator is on the cluster. However, an operator needs a little bit of special care because it is so privileged. It's usually not something you want to have in the same namespace as your application. And it's also going to be something that you want to install from like a repository of operators. So there's also like an application packaging aspect in play here. And you also want to be easily able to do to get updates to those, because updates to applications means fewer security vulnerabilities and more functionality and more abilities to run newer versions of your application. So to create an operator in this sense, we create what's known as a subscription. This is an object that comes with the operator framework and is managed by a component named the operator lifecycle manager on my cluster. The subscription is really an intent to subscribe to an operator, install it, and keep it updated as updates pour into the catalog. So here I'm referencing an application named etcd, which comes from a catalog named operatorhub.io-catalog, which is in the namespace OLM. So this is all managed by OLM. And when I create this subscription, what will happen in the background is OLM will basically pick the application from a catalog, install it in the namespace that I'm currently in, and therefore deploy the operator and set up the permissions correctly to work in this particular namespace. So if I watch here in the background, I get a pod spawning up, which is named etcd operator. This is basically governed by an object that is called cluster service version, or CSV in short, which is basically a proxy to the operator and will tell you about its version and whether or not it succeeded in installing, which it did in this case. So to use the operator, we use a concept called CRDs. So this operator shipped with a couple of CRDs, which you can see here. One of them is called etcd clusters. And this is the really nice thing about operators versus other aspects and approaches where you package a bunch of manifests and template them. You really get a nice interface to deploy your application. So what you're going to do is you're going to create an etcd cluster by creating an object named etcd cluster. In this case, it's called community demo. It has a couple of parameters that make sense for etcd cluster in this case, which is like a size, how many nodes I want to have in my etcd cluster, and what version they should be running. So that could be all of it, just to get one up and running. I added an additional section here that attaches persistent volume claims to this to these etcd pods. So to create this, I'm going to instantiate the object. The operator is a custom resource controller in the background that watches for these resources to appear. And I can now basically ask Kubernetes, what's the status of my etcd cluster? So there is one that's currently being built up, and I can describe it and see what the status is. So the status is currently scaling up because I've just started deploying. It's currently at size 1, desired size is 3. So you can see it's the same goal-seeking, eventually consistent nature of the traditional standard Kubernetes operators, but this time containing specific logic for etcd. And you can basically see this these pods coming to life in the background. I already have one of them up and running. The second one is coming up. And this is already executing etcd-specific logic, right? So here, the controller, the etcd operator, makes sure that the new pods really join the cluster in a clean fashion, that they reach consensus and reach quorum, which is really important for etcd to work as a highly available distributed value store. Now, when this is finished, I could basically start using etcd. At no point did I need to know about how etcd comes to life or how it's kept highly available. That's all part of the operator. So the operator will basically tell me at some point here when it's done provisioning, where can I connect to this cluster, what's the state, how many members do I have, and so on. I can basically shortcut this a little bit for the sake of time and go into one of these pods here that make up the etcd cluster. And in the etcd pod, I obviously have all the etcd tooling in there, like etcd control, and I could ask it what's the cluster health, and you see it's a 3-node healthy etcd cluster. Right? So this is the real deal. It also runs at a specific version 3.2.13. So now I could already start using this with an application that depends on this particular service. What I can also do, and what is really interesting in terms of the day 2 operations, is basically managing this etcd cluster from the perspective of the custom resource. So I can also say kube control, edit, and then my etcd cluster and could start modifying it. So let's say I want to have a new version of this because I depend on a certain feature. I could basically change this version tag here. Let's change it to 3.3.12. And then watch the pods getting updated. So this is the work of the etcd operator as well. It's in the background, looking at the health of the cluster and starting to, one by one, with the quorum in mind, restart them and have them rejoin the cluster in a clean state and reach consensus before continuing to the next one. And therefore, very carefully updating the whole deployment. So this is already done. That's all of it. So I can go back into my pod and see what has changed. So again, etcd control, cluster health. And I still have a healthy cluster, so that's good. And etcd control -v, I have etcd now running in version 3.3.12, like exactly like I specified. So the reconciliation nature is a core aspect of the operator. So what I can also do is basically scale the cluster this way. So I can again hit edit and just bump the size here to, let's say, 5. And in this reconciliation loop, the operator would pick this up and start spawning new pods in a second. So I can completely control the application from a very narrow and user-oriented surface, which is really the API of this operator, which is shipped in the form of a custom resource definition. So here you can see it will spawn additional pods, which is really cool. And then I have a 5-node cluster. Where did this operator come from? Well, I have OLM, Operator Lifecycle Manager, running in my cluster. It is itself running as a set of operators, as you might imagine. And one of them is actually an API server, which reads the catalogs, which are basically pods running with a database inside, serving similar purposes like YAM repositories serve for RPMs, and introducing the package manifest API. I can query this and see all the operators that I have available on my cluster. These are basically all the operators that I get from operatorhub.io. This is this web page. And from there, you can basically run operators straight away, given you have OLM installed. If you don't have OLM installed, there's like a quick way to basically do this. When you hit the install button here, after you read a bit of description of what this operator does, you can basically get away with a quick start to install OLM, and then run this command to create a subscription like I did manually before. Last but not least, this is a very interesting operator because the cockroach operator is basically provided by the Helm community. Now, the Helm community did not write that operator, but it turns out everybody can write an operator with the operator SDK. The operator SDK is one other part of the operator framework, which allows you to convert an existing Helm chart into an operator. So when you see my prompt here, you can basically say operator SDK, operator SDK new, and then the title of the operator, type is Helm. You give it the location of the Helm chart, which is in this case stable cockroach DB, and you can give it additional settings like I did here, and make this operator something that works across your cluster and not just in a single namespace like the etcd operator. When I do that, the operator SDK will scaffold everything that's needed to actually run an operator. And in terms of the Helm manifest, there's quite a lot of information we can take from the Helm charts, put it into a container that runs all the things in order to process Helm charts, and run that as an operator only with the permission that are really needed to run this particular piece of software on your cluster. And you get to use it in the same way as I used the etcd operator. So if you look at this generated scaffolding here, there's a deploy section which generated all the YAML manifests that are needed to deploy this operator. The only thing that I need to do is build the actual Docker file that makes up the operator. Also, this has been scaffolded for me from the SDK. I need to run it from the project directory. And that's it. I've just built an operator. Zero code approach. Everybody can do this. Usually requires not a lot of adjustments to what's generated. The only thing that usually needs to have at least another pair of eyes is the RBAC, which is something we can only partially derive from all the manifests that are contained in the chart. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. Now ready to take questions.
Any questions? I don't see any in chat. All right.
So, Jorge, what I'd like to ask is if folks could take a test run, especially with the Helm stuff, we'd love to have more operators contributed to operatorhub.io. And if you have any questions, I'll add them. The link to the Google group for the SIG on operator framework is in the chat, and I'll add it into the doc. But we're really looking for people's feedback. There is one question now.
Jason asks, are there ways to interact with the operators without kube-cuddling web URLs directly?
Yeah, for sure. So this kube-cuddle web URLs is just an approach to make it really easy to get started with these. What I have done is basically I have installed Operator Lifecycle Manager from the GitHub repository. It ships with a default catalog, which is exactly what you see here. And you're free to basically carve those up into stuff that you need, or just manually create like the subscription files that you need in order to tell OLM to install something. So the web part is really just a nice shortcut. You would not necessarily do this. Like in other Kubernetes distributions like OpenShift, you have like GUIs that provide you install buttons and things. But really what it comes down to are basically subscriptions, which is an intent to install an operator and keep it up to date over time, similar to a YAM subscription and a YAM repository. So that's how you instantiate it. And there's also that construct of a cluster service version, which is the actual operator object. It's just not called that way, which tells OLM what to do. So if I look at my CSVs here, I have this one, and if I look at it, I see like information that is used to feed user interfaces, to tell what needs to be deployed, what custom resource definitions need to be set up, what permissions this operator needs in order to run correctly, a textual description. This is a bit of a bloated file because it contains also UI relevant information, but for the sake of deploying it, what it really needs to
sorry, we have to hard cut off now, agenda-wise. Sure. Sorry. But you have the links where people can find you and continue the discussion. So sorry about that. Also, thanks for being flexible. We did snafu this demo because of the time zone change from a little while ago. So thank you, Daniel, for coming on. With that, we're moving on to the release updates. Claire?
Sure. I will try to keep this super brief. So we're nearing the end of week 3 for the 1.15 release. We have our enhancements freeze scheduled for next Thursday, April 30th. Friendly reminder to be included in enhancements freeze. Your enhancement must have an open issue in Kubernetes enhancements, and it must have a KEP in an implementable state by EOD on the 30th. If it doesn't have either of those two and you still need it included in the 1.15 milestone, you will have to submit an exception after the 30th. And right now we are tracking 46 enhancements. 24 of those are alpha, 14 of those are beta, and 7 are stable. So lots of alpha features, it sounds like, but we will see how many of those fall off the milestone after enhancements freeze next week. And then after enhancements freeze, I think the next, well, actually technically before enhancements freeze, the next notable date is on Monday. We should be trying to cut our alpha 2. And that is all that is happening in week 4 of the 1.15 release.
Any questions for Claire? All right, next patch release updates. Tim Pepper, I saw you typing in the document. Is anybody going to cover point releases? If not, we can move on. Okay, so real quick, I wanted to do a contributor tip of the week, and My share button is missing. 1 second. All right, I'm just going to talk about it instead. There's a link in the notes to the contributor cheat sheet, which I am going to link right here. This is something that I started a long time ago and haven't had a time to really revise. And our outreachy intern, Edward, went back and updated it a bit. So what I really like is it's a list of links of things that you can find in the project that are useful for you if you're contributing. Specifically, the second half of that sheet is all brand new and it's really useful. And it really kind of ties in a bunch of pages from around the community repo into one kind of cheat sheet that's really useful. And I've also put in a link to a epic bug, like a tracking issue, which I will paste in chat again, for people to translate this into their native language. So they've got a bunch of Chinese, Korean, Japanese, German, Spanish, French, Indonesian, Portuguese, Italian, and Hindi. Each of them have their own issue filed in GitHub. So if you speak any of those languages and want to help contribute to translating that, we would appreciate it. And with that, we're going to move on to SIG updates. We have only one SIG presented today, and that's SIG PM. Stephen, you still only get 10 minutes, so don't think you're going to speak for 40 minutes. Just a reminder to everybody.
Darn. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So I'm going to actually keep it short and sweet, as I like to do. That's the wrong button. This is the right one. All right. Hey, everyone. I am Stephen Augustus. I'm one of the SIG PM chairs. We're going to go through just a few slides today about SIG PM. So what have we been up to? Our most recent updates is we recently did a chair rotation-ish. So Aparna has been a chair for quite some time. We are graduating her to emeritus status. And myself and Jace are stepping up as SIG PM chairs. And then also we made a minor modification to the SIG PM mailing list to kind of bring it in line with all the other SIG mailing lists. So that happened yesterday, just in time for this meeting. So you can reach us at kubernetes-sig-pm@googlegroups.com. So what else is going on? Well, a charter's coming. So I just wanted to clear like the high level intent for our charter. So we're going to be covering 4 sub-projects. And the sub-projects are the KEP and enhancements process overall. So everything that's involved with making KEPs successful and kind of spreading the word throughout SIGs. The second one being project management. So there has been it seems like there has been a need overall across SIGs and working groups and any group within the Kubernetes community to have project management, to have some sort of grooming process for org level and project level boards. So what we'd like to do is essentially staff project managers for SIGs. So expect to hear more of that. I think I know Paris is interested in this for SIG Contrib-X. So we're going to start by covering some of the SIGs that we already cover. So there's a decent amount of overlap between myself and Jace through Azure, release, PM, architecture, right? I believe Ihor has been covering some of the stuff for Contrib-X, so that will probably continue. But yeah, that program will be developing over the next few quarters. If you have interest as a project manager or interest as a SIG who wants a project manager, please let us know. Please let us know. The next bullet is the CNCF end user community. So end user as in specifically the CNCF end user community, which is a group. It's a membership level for CNCF, and what we usually do every quarter or two is do a presentation to the end user community, right? So these are actual consumers of Kubernetes, and what we've been realizing in that kind of in that communication is that it's kind of one-sided. So we want to be able to kind of open up a feedback loop between that end user community, get their notes on what we could be doing better as a community and bring that back in. And kind of, so we're working with Cheryl Hung, who is the director of ecosystem at Linux Foundation. And we want to, our first, I think our first meeting is going to be June 11th. So if you're part of the CNCF end user community, we'll be doing a presentation on both SIG PM and SIG release during that presentation. So any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Ihor. We'll be co-presenting for that. And then finally, external communications. So external communications, this has come up quite a bit. How do we message what happens during not just the release cycle, but how do we track things that are out of tree for Kubernetes, right? And what we're realizing is that being able to essentially kind of enumerate all of the things that have happened across a release cycle basically happens within the changelog of Kubernetes. And I think that that's not entirely an accurate place for that to be put. But it has classically been the place for these updates to go, strictly for the sake of being on that kind of PR and communications train for each quarter. So what we'd like to do is figure out a way for SIGs to still present the information of what's been happening for them day to day, whether this is blog posts, podcasts, different things like that, right? So figuring out what external communications looks like for the Kubernetes community is going to be another sub-project for us. And obviously that will be deep work between us, Contribex, and the CNCF and LF. So some things that we've been noodling on, things that you can expect to see within the next quarter or so, a KEP one sheet. So Lockie had the awesome idea of this will essentially be the FAQ of how to be successful when writing a KEP. We think that that's a reasonable output for the process. You know, over the last few quarters, especially as we've made KEPs a requirement for the release process, there's been confusion. There are KEPs that lag, and we want to kind of move that forward and help make everyone successful. So, these go hand in hand, the one sheeter as well as the KEP retrospective. I'm thinking based on timelines that we probably won't be able to do something like that until after KubeCon. But essentially what we'll do is go from, we'll pick maybe the top 6 SIGs or so and have a sit down in one of their SIG meetings to talk about their experience with KEPs and what we can be doing better. To that end, as after the retrospective, and I think after KubeCon, we'll plan to do a KEP office hours. So this will be an additional meeting, probably bi-weekly. So it'll be the week right after the standard SIG PM meeting. And what this is you can essentially say, hey, I'm getting ready to write a KEP. I don't know where to begin. Or, hey, I've got a KEP that I've already submitted. How can I move it forward? You know, it's marked as provisional and I haven't been able to get traction on it. Or I've got a KEP that I want to move from provisional to implementable. And again, I don't know how to get started. So what are the things that the release team expects out of me? What are the things that that SIG PM is expecting for for a well-written KEP? So we'll talk about some of that stuff. Additionally, I think part of it is the people who are listed in KEP in the KEP owner files right now are essentially the SIG chairs and SIG technical leads. I want to make it known that if you have people in your SIG that you trust to review and approve this content, you should add them as owners for your individual KEP subdirectory. So you know, again, and this extends both on the SIG level as well as the Kubernetes wide level, right? So these are top level KEPs that are reviewed by architecture and maybe a few other groups. If you have reviewers and approvers that you trust that are not just the SIG chairs and technical leads, feel free to add them to the owners files for your individual subdirectories. And then you know, finally, we want to really move forward on closing out the the non-KK targeted Kubernetes enhancements. It's like writing in hieroglyphics there. But the everything that is not in tree Kubernetes, we want to start shutting down. We currently have a list of I want to say 136 enhancement issues that we track, and someone, and it's usually a singular person and occasionally some shadows across the cycle, have to read each of those and try to project what the current status is for each of those enhancement issues. So I think removing some of that burden by kind of starting to thin out the non-Kubernetes targeted issues will be helpful. So we're going to try to do that over the next quarter as well. So how can you reach us? Who we are, Caleb Miles, Ihor Dvoretsky, Jay Singer Dumars, and myself, Stephen Augustus. We are available. All of our info is on Kubernetes community, SIG-PM. The Slack channel, again, is SIG-PM, and the mailing list is Kubernetes SIG-PM. Thank you all for your time. Was I on mute the whole time? No.
Yes, exactly. Good. Any questions for SIG-PM? All right. Eric from SIG Testing is next. Not a bot.
I am not a bot. Just right now, I haven't figured out how to have my bot chat. So I don't have a presentation, unfortunately, or anything, but I can chat about various things. So I'm Eric from SIG Testing, and guess maybe talk a little bit about some kind work that's been going on, some prow work, and some changes to our build system. And on the kind side of things, kind, if you don't know, is our system for deploying a Kubernetes cluster into a pod or a container, which we think will be useful. Eventually, we want to make this the primary way of doing, like, EDE tests on your local workstation without having a cloud provider. We're working on getting a blocking pre-submits. We have a pre-submit that's running. It's not blocking. We're working on making that blocking. Long term, there's been some discussion with SIG cluster lifecycle about sort of making that the primary, / only supported way of having blocking pre-submits. And I thought recent, this sort of seems to be having a lot of traction around the community. People like to use it. So if you haven't, please try it out. It's faster, obviously, than deploying a real cluster. We recently got it working on ARM64, which is pretty sweet. On the Prow side of things, Prow is sort of our community CI/CD system. So, if you see lots of label shenanigans and whatnot, that is what is doing that. And so recently, we've been enabling more plugins around the whole organization. So, for example, previously, if your new repo wanted to start having a Prow pre-submit, you would have to enable the trigger plugin. We've now updated the trigger plugin to sort of work across the whole org automatically, all of our orgs. And so you just need to sort of add a job at the config, and Prow will automatically start running that pre-submit. And then so other things like now so that we have the owners files, and we've recently improved that a little bit to where we're going to start. We get into weird situations where people will add people into the owners file who aren't community members, and so that winds up with a weird experience where technically I think they can approve, or at least they are an approver in the owners file, but GitHub won't allow us to assign that person since they're not an org member. And so that winds up causing problems. And so we want to make sure that people who are owners of Kubernetes code are also community members. So we have that check-in. We sort of switched recently. I don't know if we talked about that, but we're trying to, we update Prow every day now, and it sort of uses nifty Prow updates itself. So that's kind of a little fun thing where it will, when we merge commits to Prow, it then deploys those images, and then every day a Fedabot Prow will create a pull request asking for us to give it permission to update itself, and when we merge that PR, it'll then update itself. And so that's all been working pretty well. We have 2 new utilities that might be useful, and we've also been trying to improve our getting started docs, because we sort of get a trickle of people who are interested in, using it for themselves. And so one thing is tackle. If you look inside of Prow, there's a tackle utility which will help deploy Prow into your cluster, and also will help you configure GitHub to send it webhooks and make all that work correctly. So that's way easier. We're also working on this tool called Phano, which will essentially run a Prow job local. It'll sort of convert a Prow job into a Docker run command. So it will allow you to rerun jobs locally. And so as long as you, so that should potentially make it easier for people to debug what this change to my job will do without actually having to merge it. There's also a doc out. We're sort of trying to create a roadmap for Prow about things we want to do. A lot of it has to do with sort of improving some of our monitoring, starting to use more of the standard Kubernetes like APIs, like the things for working with CRDs. And we also want to make it, eventually there's an idea of moving configs for jobs into the repo itself, as opposed to having to send a PR into test infra. So various things like that, and we're still collecting info. So if you want to have an idea of things you would like us to prioritize, go find us probably on SIG testing first, and then we can point you to the doc. On the building side of things, we've been experimenting with, most of our CI uses Bazel, and Bazel has a mode of doing things using remote execution. And so we've been playing around a little bit with that, which should hopefully, we have a weird system where like when we start a pull request, we have a big spike of compiling everything. And so we want to give that a lot of CPU so it goes fast, but then it sort of spends the rest of the hour sitting around waiting for the cluster to do stuff. So we're trying to smooth out that spikiness by sort of moving all of the build into a remote sort of cluster. And then so then we can sort of we can potentially run more things by doing that. And we've also been test infra, just like the main repo has switched over to using Go modules. And we've been kind of experimenting with how that system works. We've been trying to sort of automatically patch and do minor upgrades of our modules. As I'm sure everybody will be shocked to hear, the Go community isn't yet super great at doing SymVer correctly, which sort of conflicts with Go modules assumption that people are. And so the minor upgrades kind of are a hassle right now. But we'll see how that progresses. And I don't know if anybody has any questions or something exciting. I'm sure I probably forgot something, but that is sort of the few things I could rattle off of the top of my head.
All right, any questions for Eric? Eric, I've tried to take notes. If you could give those a once over, make sure I'm not making a liar out of you, that'd be great.
Cool.
Anything else for SIG testing? Okay, moving on to the announcements. The LTS working group still running a survey that ends on April 26th. That is tomorrow. I've added the link to the notes and we'll put them into chat. So if you can check that out and give them as much data as possible, we would really appreciate that. And there's a link to the working group itself. And let me get the survey there. There we go. And DIMS wanted to remind everyone that we now have a #PR-review Slack channel as a last resort if your PR is stuck. So the idea between this is if you've submitted a PR and you feel like it's not getting any traction and maybe you've tried to go to a SIG meeting and it was too busy, you couldn't get on the agenda. The idea for this channel to exist is to kind of have like a last minute, hey, last call, I've been struggling with this PR. We did have someone join Contribex last week that had a PR that had been sitting around for a year. So like that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid with that. So if you have cycles to help, please idle in there, or I'm sure if you ping DIMS, he'd be happy to let you know how to get involved. Shout outs for this week. So what shout outs are, we have hash shout outs in Slack. If someone's going above and beyond the Call of Duty and you want them to get them some recognition in the community, we read these out. So Nikita would like to shout out to Edouard for expanding the contributor cheat sheet and following up, even though his outreachy internship had ended. Ta-da emoji. Zachary Sarah would like to shout out to Brad Topol for his willingness to step out of the Barcelona speaking slot in order to make room for a local leader to step in. That's just classy. Well done there, Brad. And Lucas would like to shout out to Eugene Glotov for helping me with AWS, ELB, and EKS stuff. Thanks. And with that, we are early. I'd like to give you 20 minutes back. Anything else? Last minute announcements? Anything? Okay, great. Next week up will be GCP, storage, and Docs will have their status updates. And we will see everyone next week. Thank you.